Okay, so today I want to talk to you a little bit about what supplies you may need for this project. And this project is great because you can use the bare bones basics and you don't have to have anything super fancy. But you can also use some fancier supplies if you have them. But either way, you're going to get a really good result as long as you have the ability to really focus on your craftsmanship and follow through with matching textures and all that sort of good stuff. Now, in working with any sort of grid drawing, like what we're going to do, photorealism, you're going to need a good ruler that you can work with. And then you're going to need just a basic pencil, something that you can draw with that draws fairly lightly. So pencil pressure is going to be a really important part of this assignment. You want to be able to draw lightly and erase completely. That's going to be super, super important. Draw light until you know it's right is a great saying to live by as an artist. A lot of students, when they first start drawing, they're really, really heavy-handed, and it's very hard to erase all of your lines. They're going to remain visible, and you can't get rid of them. So you want to have just a regular pencil that you can draw fairly lightly with until we get everything blocked in and you can really develop your shading. So just a standard basic pencil is a must. Some of the other optional supplies that you can have are mechanical pencils. I actually really love working with mechanical pencils when it comes to doing very, very fine details because they've got such a really nice sharp point to them, and the lead in them is usually a really nice dark value. I'll show you one example. This was a drawing, a very small scale drawing that I did a few years ago of just our old house. We had a very cute little cabin up on top of the mountain in Wilkesboro, and this was a picture that I took of it in the snow, and I just did a very simple grid drawing with value structure for this. And I loved the contrast of these branches in the foreground with how dark the value was compared to all the bright whites of the snow. And this drawing, I think I did the entire thing with just a mechanical pencil. So you truly don't have to have really fancy supplies to produce good quality results. The other things that you can have, if you have shading pencils, you can use those. And if you've got a little kit, that kit will tell you the scale. You're going to see those numbers and letter codes on the ends of them. Some are great for really dark values, like this 6B, for example, that I have. You're going to see without much pencil pressure, it creates a really dark value versus a much lighter pencil, like this 5H, for example. Using the same pencil pressure, it gives me a much lighter, much more fine sort of point. It gives me some good variety in the kinds of marks that I can make. And then you're also going to need a way to shade and blend. Now, my go-to, because I'm very cheap and just am using the supplies that I have at home, are Q-tips. Q-tips are great. So if you've got a handful of those that you can steal from your bathroom, those are perfect. You can also use a more traditional blending stump to help you with shading for this project. Those are great too. I think I can also share with you a great video on how to make your own blending stumps if you want to make your own, just by rolling up some paper. And then the other thing that you're going to want are some sort of erasers to use. Now, I personally, you can't go wrong with a good cap eraser. I like that they have a nice sharp point on them and you can get some nice refined details, but just a classic pink pearl eraser works great. You can also have a kneaded eraser. These are good as well. You just have to be a little bit careful with them, but you can sort of mold and shape them into whatever sort of size you need. And I actually really like kneaded erasers because you can, instead of scrubbing back and forth, you can use them to lightly lift a layer of graphite off, and they are self-cleaning. So if you stretch them like Play-Doh, they will clean themselves, and then you have a nice clean eraser to use. So if you have one of those maybe from a drawing kit, those are great. Another trick that you can do if you have a soft eraser like a pink pearl, if you need a really highly refined, sharp point for very detailed erasing, you can take scissors or some sort of a blade and snip a little section off. Now, don't do this with somebody else's eraser because that's not very nice, but you can cut an eraser into a pretty nice sharp edge or a sharp point if you need to have some refined, very small area erasing. Maybe you need some nice sharp edges or things like that. So those are all some good options of things that you can use for this project. So now that you have your materials and you have your resource picture that's been turned to black and white, adjusted and gridded, you can now get ready to start the gridding process on your paper. Now there are two different paper options that you can use for this project. You can use either your 9x12 mixed media paper out of your sketchbook. This is a nice sturdy paper. It does have a little bit of a tooth to it, a little bit of a grain or a texture. Some artists love that and some artists hate that. That's really just personal preference, but it will work great for this project. And then your other option is to use a 9x12 Bristol board, which is a very smooth drawing surface, and it's even thicker than the mixed media paper. It's a really heavy paper, and that's my personal preference, but I just like working with a really smooth surface. But for this project, I'm going to demonstrate on the mixed media paper just because that's probably what most of you guys have at home and are going to end up using. I've ripped this out of the sketchbook, and we are now going to apply our grid. So you want to grab a pencil that you can draw super lightly with. And when I say lightly, I mean you almost can't see the marks that you've just made, because we're going to want to make sure that we don't have any visible lines that are left over from the grid at the end of this project. We don't want those to be visible, so we want to make sure we draw so lightly that we can completely erase them and there's no hint that they ever even existed. And you'll also need your ruler. Now I'm going to I'll start with the short side. The edge of the paper, if yours has a perforated edge like mine, you can tear that off. And we're going to start across here at the top, and we're going to create a 1-inch grid. So make sure that you line your ruler up exactly where the 0 is with the edge of the paper, and you should have exactly 9 inches on the other side. And as lightly as you can, make a tiny tick mark at each 1-inch increment. Make sure that you keep your eyes directly over the part of the ruler that you're measuring to make sure that those lines don't get skewed or tilted in any way. And just super, super light. You can barely see mine. I'm probably doing mine a little bit darker just so it shows up a little bit on the camera, but just as small and as faint as you can get it. And then with our paper, we're going to slide down to the bottom and repeat that. Now, once you have measured at the bottom and you've measured at the top, you are going to connect those. And a trick that I use is once I get them lined up, I make sure I sort of brace my ruler towards the middle. And then instead of actually gripping my pencil, I sort of just let it rest across the tops of my fingers, just enough, and then just as gently as I can, I draw that all the way across. Now that line is so faint, I'll be able to erase that later with no problem at all. It's barely visible, and that is exactly what we want. Okay, so now that I have all of my lines done, I'm going to now measure across the long side, which should be 12 inches. So line it up at your 0, and then every 1 inch, make a tick mark. Now, my paper happens to be just 1/16 of an inch shy of 12, and because of that, This is why it's very important that whenever you are drawing a grid, that you never flip your ruler over or turn your paper, because that shortness, I want to make sure it's the same shortness on the lower side. So whenever I've measured it at the top, I'm just going to slide down to the bottom. And then that way, this whole row of squares is going to be that 1/16 of an inch short. And once I have the top and bottom measured as lightly as I can, I'm going to bring those lines across as well. Okay, and so now I have my entire piece of paper gridded, and you can see how light that grid is. That is what we want. Now, to turn in your pictures for this today, I need to be able to check that your measurements are absolutely precise and perfect. Working with photorealism, precision is everything, so being really, really attentive to details. So what I want you to do is take your ruler and you're going to line it up across the bottom edge of your paper. Line your 0 up along this bottom corner where it's lined up with that edge, and all the way across to your 12. And then I want you to take one photograph with your picture this way. Make sure you take it from directly above, and that's going to help me see if all of your measurements are really accurate. So take one picture like that, and then line your ruler up on the side, on the shorter side, with it lined up at the 0 to the 9, and take another photograph of it this way. That's going to be really, really important that we get this grid exactly right before we start diving into the drawing portion of this, which will start tomorrow.